Today, we're going to talk about creating an effective broker opinion of value. And it's going to build a little bit on what we talked about last time. Last month, our webinar was on creating effective multifamily marketing. And the idea behind that was every listing you get, what you should see happen if you did what we proposed in that was you should get about 2 more listings out of your listing. It's just using listings to build on itself. So today we're going to talk about, okay, when you do send that marketing out and you get people asking you, okay, I'd like to meet with you, I'd like to find out what my property is worth, what do you do? What does your listing process look like? Well, for us, that's creating a broker opinion of value. It's essentially a broker appraisal. Okay, yeah, so last month we had a case study on that multifamily marketing. That property that we did a case study on, it was 7 days on the market last month. It's now in contract. It's going to close in mid-July. From that, we got 8 requests for these BOVs, this is how we get our listings. So we got 8 requests from that marketing that we did. So if you do that marketing, you should get some requests to evaluate property. Of those BOVs, we actually have 2 currently listed. I'm hoping to get as many as 5. We're still talking to 3 others that are in the process of getting paperwork together for us to analyze the property. But if you remember last month, we said, look, 1 out of 4 of these usually end up in a listing, and that's indeed exactly what happened. So the way we get these lists is we use BOVs to go after them. We say we're going to do these evaluations for free, and we essentially just do a broker appraisal, and then we put a little bit of secret sauce at the end, which I'll show you. And it's 1 page, and it actually drives everything home for these guys. It's pretty cool. So we'll talk about that. Now, what is a broker opinion of value? It's a BOV. You might have heard broker opinion of value. You might have heard BPO, or broker price opinion. They're essentially the same thing. In commercial, you'll probably hear BOV more often than BPO. There's no difference. It's just residential agents, at least in California, from my experience, they tend to say BPO. Brokers that do commercial, they're usually doing BOV. That's the only difference. Now, we use these to establish a price point with sellers and to secure our listings. Now, when you're doing a BOV, you're going to look at a couple things. Mostly, you're looking at the metrics by which a property is evaluated. Every property type is going to have a set of metrics that establish its value. For multifamily, these are the 4. We call them the big 4. For retail, which is another property type that I guess I specialize in, is multifamily and retail. For retail, you might not see all these. You're not going to look at gross rent multiplier for retail. You're probably going to look at cost of occupancy for the tenants. So in retail, that's what you're looking at really closely, is what's the health of the tenant. In multifamily, we're not as concerned about that, but we are concerned about these 4. So real quick, just to go over these, cap rate's probably your most important. That's going to take into account not just the income stream, but the health of the income stream. So a cap rate's going to look at, all right, what's the income, but what's the expenses as well, and what's your vacancy. It takes all of that into consideration and gives you a return. So that's pretty valuable for owners. So that's probably the most important. Your second most important metric that you want to analyze, especially when you're talking to an owner, is the price per foot. Doesn't have anything to do with the income, but you can see where the market sits on average. You can see, where it sits compared to replacement cost, all that stuff. It's important to know. Price per unit and price gross rent multiplier, those 2 are probably not going to be in retail. These are pretty much specific to multifamily. Oh, I think I heard, okay, just making sure everyone's on mute. Okay, price per unit, pretty valuable for multifamily. You're probably going to weigh them a little bit heavier when you're looking at comps that are of the same size. So a 1-bedroom, 1-bath property is going to be valued differently than a 2-bed, 1-bath property, right? Same thing with multifamily. 1-bed units are different than 2-bed units, or different than 3-bed units. So if you're looking at price per unit, keep that in mind and try and pull comps that are of the same unit mix so those values don't look a little bit weird. Gross rent multipliers is the fourth one you want to look at. It's not used as often as it used to be. And again, guys, if you're not familiar with any of these terms, if you go to nccar.org, I'm sure they have a lot of resources there. This is also stuff we teach in the certification class that we have. So if you're not certified for commercial real estate yet, go to commercialrewebinar.com, and that actually, we teach you all this stuff. So if you're not familiar, you can Google it too. Gross rent multiplier is not used very often. It's essentially a multiple of the rent, or I'm sorry, of the income as it pertains to the price. Now, it doesn't include expenses. It doesn't include vacancy, but it's still used very widely. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading. Okay, just reading some notes. It's still used very widely, and the reason gross rent multiplier is still used pretty widely is a seasoned investor who owns a lot of multifamily doesn't really care necessarily what the expenses are on a building. They know what they're going to be able to establish. They know they're going to be able to establish $2,200, a unit for expenses, or that's actually pretty low, $3,000 a unit for expenses. They know what their numbers are, but they're more concerned about what the rent is for that building compared to its price. So that might be why that's still used, but that's the 4 metrics you want to use with multifamily. So, is it going? Oh, there we go. So when we're doing a BOV, we're going to analyze those 4 pieces. And here's what we need. It's pretty simple. You need a subject property. You're going to take at least 3 listing comps for 3 properties that are on the market. You're going to take 3 properties that are sold. You're going to analyze them based on those 4 metrics, or whatever metrics that property type that you're working on goes by. And then you're going to conclude it. So you're going to pretty well establish a price with the owner. If they think it's worth something and you present this to them, they're going to have a hard time trying to convince you it's outside of what this range is that you're going to show them. So you're saying, look, all these listings are within this bracket. All the sales are within this bracket. We should be within this bracket. And you can actually, what we do is we actually just let the owner decide. We say, look, here's the price that we're proposing, but anywhere within this bracket, take a look. And what you'll see is if they want to price it high, they'll say, well, what if we do it here? And you can say, look, it's going to take longer to sell the higher you price it, but it's still within that range. So it's good to talk about. And then at the end, what we like to do is we put that secret sauce, which I'll show you at the end, but it actually doubles your GCI. It's pretty neat. So I'll show you all the tools that you need to create a BOV. But first, let's kind of review what it should look like, all those different pieces. First, you're going to need the income and expenses from the owner. So get the income and expenses from last year. Get a rent roll. You can just have last month's rent roll if you need. And then some capital improvements, because you're going to want to consider those when you're evaluating a property. Now the subject property is going to have a couple things. I'm going to show you guys, this is actually one of the ones we listed. This is a 50% occupied building, value add property. I will show the full BOV to you guys after we go through these different topics. After we go through all the list of things that you need for your, so you're going to have a subject property, get a brief description. You need a financial summary, which is what you see on the screen here. And maybe a few pictures just to make it look good. You can find the property's tax records on CoStar. You can find them on LoopNet. Prospect Now has that. Property Radar on the West Coast. They don't go on to all the states. I think they go into most of the West Coast states. Or the county website, if you don't subscribe to any of that. That'll all have the property, the unit mix, square footage, all that stuff. So you have an analysis, financial, of the subject property. And then very simply, you'll pull 3 listing comps. And this is how ours looks. You see right there, it's got all those metrics. It's got the price per unit, price per square foot, cap rate, and gross rent multiplier, and a couple others. It's got the unit mix, etc. But this will help you establish, you got to put those 4 metrics in there so you can establish that base range that the subject property is going to be worth. So you'll see in a second that, like we showed before, those graphs, where it shows kind of where the average is and where the subject property lies. For listings, you can usually go to CoStar. You can also go to LoopNet. Outside of that, there's a couple other sites, but those are probably the main 2 that you want to go to find listings. For sales comps, those are a little bit tougher. We use CoStar here. LoopNet also has sales comps, a little bit expensive, I think. Obviously, if you don't have CoStar, CoStar can cost you upwards of $300 to $400 a month, depending on your office. So it is expensive. Sometimes you might have to just rely on listings or listed property if you don't subscribe to these things. But again, you see they've got those 4 basic metrics for multifamily: gross rent, cap rate, square foot, and price per unit. After you've got your property, you've got sales comps, you've got listed comps, then just analyze it. And I'll show you the tools that we use, but this is what it spits out. You'll see that there's a bracket there. On the left is the subject property on each of those 4. And you see that, it fits pretty well within that range. This isn't the property that I showed you. I think this is one of the ones in Texas that we have. But you'll see that, all 4 of those, it's priced about at market, and that's the way it should look. You shouldn't have 3 of these match up with the market and one just be wildly off. It's kind of a red flag when you see that happen. On top of that, what we'll do is we'll put a range. So you saw there that the cap rate, let's see, cap rate average of 6.6 on this one. So 6.6 would be on the left-hand side there. And you can see where the owner price-wise would be at the different cap rates. So if he wants to price it up there at 1.3, he's going to see that, okay, that's pretty far above the market. So it's a good way to kind of box them in a little bit and get them to see, okay, well, obviously it's got to be within this range. Otherwise, they've got to have a pretty strong reason why not. So that's what you do. You conclude it with, all right, well, here's where everything's at. What do you think? Right? That's pretty much the basics of a BOV. These aren't that complicated. To put them together, they can be a little bit tough. You're going to want to use a couple tools. LoopNet and CoStar, again, are pretty commonly used to find listings and find sold properties. You can go to the public records. Like if you go on the county website and you look for the parcel maps, you should be able to find all the public records. This is what CoStar and LoopNet pull anyway. That's what you'll be able to find. Now, to create that BOV, you're going to want to use probably Curb Street. There's a couple you can use. I mean, the 2 main ones that I've seen is Curb Street and REI Weiss. REI Weiss is pretty outdated. They're trying to be user-friendly, but Curb Street is really user-friendly. It's really easy. We'll send out a link after this is over. I think we have, what's our discount? I think our discount's at about $22 a month, where REI Weiss, I believe, is at $50. So we'll send something out. You can actually try Curb Street out, I think, for like a week or so. You could also do it manually if you're into torture. We used to have an Excel spreadsheet that we would do these on, and it's a nightmare. to try and do all those on your own. So if you go back here, try and make an Excel spreadsheet with all that on it, and then mapping all this stuff, putting all that together so it looks good. That's tough. That's tough, and it's a pain. You'll have a headache in no time. But we used to do that. So what I would like to do, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a BOV that we did. This is exactly what ours looked like. So there's a cover page too, but it's got his name on it, the owner's name on it, so I can't show it to you. So we got the unit mix. You'll see we've got the income, the actual income, and the market income. On the left-hand side here, you'll see we've got cap rate. Now look at this. This is way low. Way low. But the vacancy is where that's coming in. This is a 50% full building. The cap rate, the existing cap rate, not much you can do there. If we tried to price this with the market just on cap rate, it would be like a, I don't know, like a $200,000 building. That would way off. So what we did with him is we said, look, we're going to do a pro forma cap rate. We're going to assume you get it rented up, and here's what it would look like. So what we need to do is probably price it so that pro forma cap rate is attractive to a buyer coming in. They want to finish leasing this up, which is what we did. So we showed him what his numbers actually are, and we showed him some market numbers too, and how that would affect his cap rate, or his pro forma cap rate. And that established all of these metrics. So we get the price per foot, price per unit, cap rate. So we get the market and the existing, and gross rent in the market, gross rent. And I think it was $30 short under market on each of these units. So we bumped him up on those. So from there, we had we actually split this up. We have sales, listings, and escrows if there's escrows. So some of these, I think we pulled 7 or 8 comps to build this out. So you'll see the market cap rate's up here at 7.46, and he's way down here. But everything else, he's a little bit lower price on, right? So it looks like he's way overpriced here, right? But he's not. He's about under market by, here it's saying he's under market by about a little over 10,000, because here's where he's at. Here's the market average. Same thing here. Average $86 a foot. He's down here around 65. So the idea here is, look, it's an unstable building, so let's use these other 3 metrics to help price it better. And then pro forma is going to be up above the average, so there's some spread there for the incoming buyer. We map them. So you got a map. There's the subject property. There's the other properties. And then these are on market. So obviously we didn't have a lot of information with gross rent, but we had some cap rate. Price per unit, we're floating about the same number, 56 for the listed, 54 for the listed, 56 for the solds. Price per foot's almost exactly the same. So we're seeing a pretty strong case for price per foot being up here, price per unit being at least in the 50s for something stabilized. Yeah, we mapped them again. And then we had some escrow properties. So properties in escrow were really tough to analyze. We didn't put a lot of weight on this, but you'll see here, average cap rate's pretty darn low. We're proposing that he be up here. Once stabilized, it's going to be like a 9.5 cap. Gross rent, he's a little low here. Price per foot on these, it looks like he's about at market. So we're going to have to figure out why that happened. Turns out these other properties were actually unstable too. So actually for unstable property, that tells me that he's probably about at market, maybe a little bit better. Then we go into our conclusion. So we had the property, we had the listed properties, the sold properties, escrow properties, we showed him the bracket that all those sit in. So we said, hey, here's where your property's at, and here's the average for the market. Obviously, we need to attract a buyer because your property's not stabilized. So here's where we should price it. Now we break that down for him here. Say, hey, here's the 50% occupancy. You're a little bit below market. And here's how we could solve that, right? You could put a cash infusion and bump that up and get that market value that you should be getting. You could just do a facelift, right? That's an ugly building. If you saw that front there, you could just do it a facelift, or, this is the way we went, you could just price it so that the pro forma cap rate's attractive enough to bring in a buyer. And here's how that breaks down. So you got a sales comparison. So this is without considering that it's vacant. This doesn't consider the income or expenses. Saying, hey, if this was stabilized conservatively, you could be at 1.13. Average, 1,343,000, and then there's the aggressive. So kind of gives him a range of where it might be priced if it was stabilized. So you can see we're priced at 1.1. There's a spread there. There's a pretty obvious spread, and this is on the low end of the price per unit that we saw. So you might be able to push up closer to this number if the new buyer came in and was aggressive about their leasing. And then here's just some cool stuff. So this is what ours looks like. Pretty straightforward. And then that's the special sauce. I'll show you the special sauce in a sec. So that's how we break those down. Now, that's what everything looks like. What do you do after that? So you say, here's what the value of the property is. You want to list or not? That might work. We do something extra. And it secures us. Actually, what I showed you just now is pretty standard practice to just, here's the value of the property, and they're going to have a hard time arguing with that. If they had an overinflated impression of the price, it would be fixed now. They would pretty well know, okay, well, it has to be priced like this. But that might not be enough to secure the listing. What about their income? A lot of these guys, they might say, hey, that's great, but I'm happy with the income where it's at. What happens to my income? Well, one of the things you need to do is present them with a 1031 exchange scenario, a real one, at the end. So everything's been established. Here's your price point. Here's our proposed price point. Here's what could happen if you exchange, right? And if you're not familiar with 1031 exchange, we do have I think it's an hour-long webinar on that. I think that's at straighttalkacademy.com. Under the resources tab, you can go and it's a 1 hour long webinar on 1031 exchange. Basically, that's what it is. Allows you to defer your taxes. You can't avoid them, but you can defer them. And that's what we do. We present them with this. Now with this guy, I'll show you exactly what happened with him. Currently, his building's not producing anything, right? He's in it for, I think he's in it for like 800,000 or so. We said, look, what if you sold it for 100,000 less than we're saying? What if you showed it for $1 million? Take out your broker fees, take out your closing costs, take out a loan. His loan's about 500, and here's what you're left with. You're left with, 427,000 and change. Well, what would happen if you bought a new building? He actually wanted to do 600,000. That's why we did it. But usually what I'll do, I'll take what their net proceeds are and I'll throw it into a new building based on a conservative loan to value. And we'll break that down. So here's what the loan would be. Here's the yearly debt service. And then we would show them. Now it depends on the owner, right? This guy, his concern was cash flow. I could tell that was his hot button, so that's what I highlighted. If they're concerned about equity, you can highlight that. But I chose, and this is an Arby's in think this was in Washington. It's a real Arby's. It was actually on the market. And I said, look, you're tired of managing multifamily. You're tired of spending all your time on this thing that's not making you any money because you live in San Francisco and you're not used to managing a multifamily product. What if you sold it, you took your money, you put it in an Arby's on a 20-year lease where you don't have to do anything, and all of a sudden you're making, after debt service, 40 grand a year. And not only that, but your return, you told her your cash on cash, 7.34. You're making money and you don't have to do anything. This guy's going to 1031 exchange. He's going to sell this property. He's going to take the cash out and he's going to put it in something like this. It's a single tenant net lease property. Excuse me. This is what's happening in multifamily. Usually you'll see multifamily with a higher cap rate than like single tenant net lease property. Right now what we're seeing is we've had a pretty significant compression of the cap rates across multiple products. So what that means is multifamily cap rate has gone down, so the prices have gone up. And retail, the single tenant net lease property, it's always been pretty much a bond-like as you can get in commercial real estate. It's floated about the same. Their cap, obviously in the downturn, the cap rates were higher, but they've stayed about the same. And multifamily is now at a point where the returns for a multifamily property are in the same range as the returns for a 20-year triple net lease Arby's. It's ridiculous. So you have a product like multifamily that takes a ton of your time, a ton of your energy. There's all kinds of stuff that can go wrong. All kinds of tenants, lots of stuff going on, a lot of moving parts. And you can, instead of that, these guys can have something like this that cash flows every year, and they don't have to do anything for it. They just collect a check. So we've seen this be very successful. If you take a multifamily property, you show him what it's worth, what it's really worth, and then you build in an exchange scenario. And what we're going to do, we're actually going to give you guys, this is an Excel sheet, this page, and I'll go ahead and make sure you guys get all this when we're done here. You'll get a copy of this and a BOV and all that stuff. But if you show them an exchange scenario like this, like, look, you can cash out and get the same or better return and not have any landlord responsibilities. Who would turn that down? So it's been very, very successful. So both of the listings we took from the webinar last month, both of them fully intend to 1031 exchange. So not only have we secured the listings by doing stuff like this, but we've doubled, like I said, our GCI, because they're going to have to, if they're 1031 exchanging, they're going to have to go into something else. So we just doubled the deals that we're doing just by saying, why don't you get rid of your headache? So that's what 1031 exchange is. Now, that's all you have to do. That's really all you have to do. Are there any questions from anyone? How do you evaluate properties with a lot of deferred maintenance? It's a great question. Let me pull up our BOV here. So in this one, the problem was the income, right? Income was way down, so we had to use these other three metrics to get a good idea of the property value. If you have deferred maintenance and you know what you want to do with the property, what we'll do is we will either build that into the price. So we'll say, okay, for this one, we established a value of, I think it was 1.1. We'll say if it was stabilized, here's what the value would be. And we would just back out the expenses for that, right? So if the expenses that we thought the deferred maintenance was going to cost was 80 grand, we would back that down to 1,020,000. And obviously, you know, once you do that, you're going to also want to build in something that's going to make it worth the buyer's time. If the market right here, like on this, the market was, you know, an 8 cap. We're saying the pro forma is going to be above that because we want them to be incentivized to come and buy this property. Same thing with deferred maintenance. If they're going to have to spend time or money on it, you know, back out the expenses, but also make sure you discount a little bit so that it's more attractive once it is stabilized or once the maintenance is taken care of. And you might have a little bit of trouble talking to the owner about that. What I usually do is just say, what do you think needs to be done? And they'll tell me, and I'll say, okay, well, what does that cost? You know, and then it's out of their mouth saying, okay, it's costing $150. And then I can put that in this, and they can't really argue with that because that's their number. Good question. Guys, thanks for joining us. I hope I see you guys next time. And again, if you have any other topics you want to discuss, go ahead and send them over. Thanks.